There is a generational war happening right now, and it is extremely loud. Boomers versus millennials. Gen Z versus everyone. TikTok versus Facebook. Skinny jeans versus wide leg. Avocado toast versus the housing market. The arguments are everywhere. On every platform, in every comment section, at every dinner table. And almost every generation is in it. Loudly, publicly, emotionally. Almost every generation. There is one sitting completely to the side of all of this, watching it unfold, occasionally rolling their eyes, mostly not getting involved. Not because they have nothing to say, not because they don't have opinions, but because something happened to them, something in the way they were raised, in the world they grew up in, that made this kind of noise feel like it simply isn't worth their time. That generation is Gen X, born between 1965 and 1980, currently somewhere between 45 and 61 years old. And by almost every measurable standard, the most consistently overlooked, least complained about, least complained to generation alive. A poll went around social media asking people to vote on the most ignored generation. The options were Gen Z, millennials, baby boomers, and the silent generation. Gen X wasn't even on the poll. That's about right. But here's what most people get wrong. It's not that Gen X is forgotten. It's why they don't seem to care. And what that actually reveals about the psychology underneath. Psychologists who study identity formation in low supervision environments have found something consistent. People raised with high autonomy and low external support develop what's called an internal locus of control, the deep-seated belief that your outcomes depend on your own actions, not on public recognition or external validation. When that wires into you at age 10, it doesn't just shape how you think. It shapes what you're even willing to spend energy on. It shapes what feels worth fighting for. And for an entire generation, it shaped everything, including why they're the only ones not fighting right now. To understand Gen X, you have to go back to the houses they came home to after school. Empty ones. Gen X grew up as latchkey kids. Divorce rates peaked in the early 1980s just as the oldest Gen Xers hit their teenage years. Both parents working became the norm. So millions of Gen X children came home, let themselves in with the key around their neck, and figured out the afternoon alone. Nobody was checking. Nobody was hovering. The philosophy of the era was simple. You'll figure it out. And they did. They had to. For most of them, this wasn't a trauma narrative. It was just Tuesday. You came home, watched MTV, handled your life. The independence was so total and so early that it stopped feeling like independence and started feeling like just how things work. Psychologists call this experience-dependent plasticity. When self-sufficiency is practiced daily from childhood, it doesn't stay a skill. It becomes an identity. By adulthood, Gen X wasn't just capable of being on their own. They were most comfortable that way, not because of some superior character trait, but because they had been practicing since they were 10. Then, Gen X stepped into the adult world and found the conversation already taken. The boomers had owned the cultural stage since the 1960s. Woodstock, Vietnam, civil rights, enormous events that an entire generation built their identity around. The media was fascinated with boomers. The political class was boomers. 77 million of them, taking up most of the oxygen. So Gen X did what childhood had trained them to do. They shrugged, found their own lane, and got on with things. The culture they built reflected that exactly. Slacker, Clerks, Reality Bites, alternative rock, all of it drenched in a dry, ironic worldview. Not idealists making art about changing the world, but people who had watched the previous generation make enormous noise and quietly decided it hadn't added up to much. Whatever, as a cultural response. That was Gen X's contribution to the English language, a posture built over years of watching things that were supposed to matter, not matter. Then came the millennials, and suddenly, everything was about them. 83 million millennials entered the workforce with a cultural volume that made even the boomers look quiet. Their student debt, their burnout, their therapy, their feelings about their feelings, the media, the advertising world, the cultural conversation, all of it pivoted overnight. Gen X had been quietly waiting their turn, watching boomers cling to power, expecting to eventually step into leadership. Instead, they got leapfrogged. The boomers were still there, the millennials right behind them. The world skipped straight from one to the other. One Gen X writer said it best: "We built all the websites that millennials now waste their lives on." Built the platform, didn't get the credit. By the time Gen Z arrived and the OK Boomer Wars began, Gen X had been skipped twice. They didn't fight for the microphone. They just went back to work. But here's the thing: most people never stop to ask, is the indifference real, or is it something else entirely? Something that looks like not caring, but is actually one of the most psychologically sophisticated responses a generation has ever developed? This generational war is, at its core, a war about who gets to be understood. Boomers want credit for what they built. Millennials want recognition for what they've endured. Gen Z wants acknowledgement that the world they're entering is harder than the one before them. All three are genuine desires for validation, and all three require public performance. The complaint, the clapback, the viral hot take. Gen X's psychological profile works against all of that. They don't perform. They are constitutionally allergic to public earnestness. Complaining loudly about being ignored is the most un-Gen X thing imaginable. A leadership expert once joked she had no advice for Gen X. They don't need it. They wouldn't care. And even if they did, they'd never admit it. That joke went viral among Gen X. And instead of being offended, they shared it and went back to not caring. That reaction tells you everything. Here is what the generational war narrative completely misses. While every other generation has been arguing about who had it harder, Gen X has been quietly running things. They are currently the largest share of global leadership positions: CEOs, directors, senior managers. They got there without a movement, without a manifesto, without anyone documenting their struggle. They also became the bridge generation nobody planned for. Old enough to remember life before the internet, young enough to adapt completely. They didn't need a digital native label. They just figured it out. Same way they figured out the empty house after school. Psychologist Jean Twenge noted that Gen X developed unusually high levels of self-reliance and stress tolerance compared to adjacent generations. Not because they were stronger, but because they had more practice doing hard things alone, without an audience, without applause. That is what the generational war will never produce. Quiet competence built in private. No camera required. Gen X isn't indifferent. They're just done performing. They grew up in empty houses and figured it out. They entered a full room and found their own lane. They got leapfrogged twice and kept working. They watched an entire culture built on public validation and quietly decided it wasn't for them. That's not apathy. That's a value system, one that was forged early, tested repeatedly, and never really needed anyone else's approval to hold together. The generational war will eventually exhaust itself. The noise will die down. The hot takes will stop landing. And when the dust settles, the generation that never joined the fight will still be there, doing what they've always done, getting on with it, quietly, without waiting for anyone to notice.